Have you ever felt like something inside you had shut down? As if your will had vanished, your energy had dried up, and the motivation that once drove you was now locked away somewhere you can no longer access. Maybe you're wondering, what's wrong with me? And I want to tell you something that could change everything. Maybe nothing is wrong. Maybe you're just in transition. We live in a world that demands consistency, productivity, presence, but ignores the most important thing, the rhythm of the soul. And your soul doesn't work like a clock. It works like a season. Sometimes it blooms, sometimes it withers. And when it goes silent, the ego screams, "You've lost your motivation." But Rumi said, "Don't worry. Everything you lose comes back in another form." Maybe the motivation you're missing isn't lost. Maybe it's just changing form. What you call discouragement could be the womb of a new version of you. What you call emptiness could be the sacred space between the old that's dying and the new that's yet to be born. You are not broken. You are being reborn. Does this sentence sound too beautiful to be true? That's okay. Truth, when it comes from the soul, doesn't shout. It whispers. And right now, perhaps your soul is trying to whisper something the outside world hasn't taught you to hear. The transition is not the end. It's the beginning of everything. Lack of willpower isn't weakness, it's a calling, an invitation to dive in, a silence that forces you to listen to what you've been ignoring for too long. How many times have you forced yourself to keep going, even when everything inside was screaming for a break? How many times have you accused yourself of being weak, lazy, or unproductive, when, in reality, you were just tired of supporting a version of yourself that no longer fit? This pain you feel, this tiredness, this apathy that no one understands, is the portal between the old and the new, the space where the ego falls silent and the soul begins to speak. But it takes courage to listen, because listening to the soul means accepting that much will die within you before something new can blossom. Rumi also said, "Don't look outside for what can only be cured inside." And maybe that's what you've been trying to do, to seek external motivation that can only come from within. But the world hasn't taught you that. The world wants you to run, to win, to shine, even if you're bleeding inside. But today, here, you can stop, breathe, and allow yourself something radically liberating, to feel. Feel what is changing in you, grieving the parts of you that are leaving. Feel the silence where there was once noise, because this silence is not the end. It is the womb of rebirth. Maybe you're in one of those moments where everything seems to have stopped, where dreams have become distant, passion has faded, and even the things you loved seem to no longer make sense. But please, don't judge yourself. Don't rush. And most importantly, do not abandon yourself. What you're feeling now may not be a crisis. It may be the beginning of your healing. You are not without motivation. You are being called back to yourself. And that is profound. That is sacred. It is in that very space of emptiness where nothing seems to make sense that you begin to touch what is true. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe this video found you because, somehow, your soul is asking to be heard. And that's why I want to invite you to comment below. I'm in transition. Write this as a silent statement, as a reminder to yourself. Because when you write, you anchor. You declare to the universe, and to your own soul, that you are ready to move through this moment with awareness. And if this content touched any part of you, don't let it go unnoticed. Hit the like button, not out of vanity, but because it helps this message reach other souls who are going through the same journey, but still believe they're alone. And if you feel this kind of reflection is part of your path, subscribe. This channel is more than videos. It's a space for rescue, reconnection, and silent healing. We are still just at the beginning, because now that you've started to recognize that it's not unmotivated but in transition, it's time to dive even deeper. Have you ever felt like nothing truly touched you anymore? As if the sparkle of the things that once enchanted you had suddenly faded, and what remained was just a weariness that's hard to explain. Maybe you tried to fight back. Maybe you searched for that old motivation, that energy that made you get up, chase after things, believe. But everything seems harder now, heavier, more distant. And then you start to wonder, what happened to me? As if at some point you lost yourself, stopped being who you were, and guilt begins to creep in silently, like an emotional fog. You compare yourself to who you used to be, to who is still productive, to who seems happy. And this contrast hurts, not because you don't want to change, but because you don't understand why you feel this way. Stuck, disconnected, almost empty. But what if what you're experiencing isn't a failure? What if it's not a bad phase, but rather a transition no one ever taught you to recognize? No one told you that sometimes true awakening begins when everything loses its flavor, when the soul begins to slow down, not because it's given up, but because it's reevaluating where it truly wants to go. You're not lacking motivation. You just don't want to waste your energy on things that don't make sense to your essence. There's an invisible pain that many carry in silence, the pain of no longer recognizing themselves, the pain of trying to be the same person you were before and failing, the pain of feeling like you should be happy, but you're not. And this hurts more than any external criticism because it's a demand coming from within, a cruel demand that tells you to go back to being what, in truth, no longer serves your soul. But how do you return to a place where you no longer belong? That's when the soul begins to move in silence. When everything seems still, stagnant, that's exactly where the invisible is at work. Rumi said there's a space between everything that was and everything that will be. A sacred space. An interval where pain isn't punishment, it's preparation. And perhaps that's where you are now. You feel like you've lost your will to do anything, but in reality, perhaps you've simply grown tired of sustaining a life that no longer represents who you're becoming. The old you is beginning to crumble, but the new you hasn't arrived yet. It's an emotional limbo, where nothing is clear, but everything is being formed. This weariness of the soul, this lack of enthusiasm, this desire to isolate yourself, to shut out the outside world, these are signs that something is changing within you. But since no one ever taught you to recognize this process as sacred, you interpret it as weakness, as failure, as a lack of motivation. But it isn't. It's a transition. This is the invisible pain. The pain of changing without knowing what's emerging. The pain of giving up control, of not having all the answers. The pain of having to trust in the dark, of walking without a map. And this pain, though silent, is profound. It visits in the middle of the night, in moments when everything seems calm on the outside, but inside your soul is restless. You try to fill it with distractions, try to convince yourself it's just a phase, but there's something more, something that pulses and calls you inward, because that's where the answer lies, not outside, not in what others expect of you, but in the silence of your soul, which whispers that you're not without motivation. You're shedding old versions so the real you can emerge. And perhaps this is the biggest trap, trying to return to what you've already overcome, trying to find motivation in places that no longer make sense, expecting the same things as before to still fulfill you, when in fact you're on a different frequency, at a different pace, in a different stage. But the world doesn't prepare you for this. It demands movement, productivity, enthusiasm. But what if true power lies precisely in pausing, in listening, in vulnerability? You're not failing. You're being reoriented. You're being called to look at yourself more deeply. And this call hurts because it demands detachment. It demands that you stop defining yourself solely by your goals, your results, your old dreams. Perhaps now is the time to let something truer emerge. Something that comes from within. Something only you can feel. If you're living in a time where everything seems dark, silent, and directionless, know that this is also part of the journey. That feeling of no longer fitting in, of no longer wanting to do what you used to, is legitimate. And more than that, it's necessary, because it's in this discomfort that the soul begins to expand. And it doesn't expand in euphoria. It expands in listening, in pausing, in not knowing. So before trying to go back to the way things were, ask yourself, who are you now? What has changed within you that hasn't yet been named? What is silently trying to emerge behind this apparent discouragement? Don't rush. Don't try to understand everything with your mind. There are things that only the soul can reveal in time, and your time is coming. If this touched you in any way, if you felt that these words found something that was already there inside waiting for a name, comment below. I'm coming back to myself. Your comment could be the word that another soul needed to read so they don't feel alone in this journey. You are not standing still. You are being remade. No matter how much everything around you tells you otherwise, no matter how much the world screams demanding haste, movement, productivity, achievements, your soul has chosen another path, a silent path, a path invisible to those who see from the outside, but profoundly transformative for those who feel it within. This stagnation that seems to hold you back is not failure. It is a sacred state, a point of internal gestation, a pause imposed by the soul itself so that what no longer serves can dissolve, and what is truly yours can be truly born. There is a rhythm within you that the world doesn't understand. A different beat made not of external urgencies but of internal pulses. The soul has its time, and it doesn't grow under pressure. It flourishes in the darkness, in silence, in the interval between what has already been and what has not yet been revealed. Rumi said, "The soul has its own way of growing, in the darkness, in silence." And perhaps that's what's happening now. You're not without direction. You're being called to stop so you can finally listen. But listening to the soul requires silence. And silence, for those who have lived long in noise, can seem frightening. You've been taught to rush, to pursue goals, to fill spaces, to distract yourself from pain. But when all of that loses its meaning, when emptiness arrives, it doesn't come to destroy, it comes to reveal. It's in the silence of stagnation that you begin to realize what you're still trying to control, what you're still trying to hold on to, even though it's already gone. That discouragement that visits you in the mornings, that weight that seems to have no name, isn't a lack of motivation. It's the soul asking for space, asking for time, asking for retreat, because before blossoming, every root needs to sink deeper into the earth, and that hurts. It hurts because it's not visible. It hurts because no one taught you to recognize this phase as sacred. It hurts because the world outside is rushing by, and you feel like you're falling behind. But the soul doesn't rush, it dives. You're diving, and in this dive, a lot will fall apart. Old ideas about who you are, old desires that no longer represent you, desires you thought were yours but that deep down stemmed from external expectations. All of this begins to slowly unravel, and this process, though invisible, is powerful. It's a silent mourning for versions of yourself that no longer exist. It's a cleansing, a purging, a return. Rumi wrote, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And maybe your heart is being broken now, not by something bad, but so that it can finally make room for what is true. Not what the world expects of you, but what your essence has always known. This pain is not punishment, it is liberation. Every discomfort, every weariness, every emptiness are signs that something new is approaching. But this newness doesn't arrive with euphoria. It arrives with silence. And silence is difficult, because it reveals. It reveals the patterns you've been repeating for years. It reveals the stories you've been telling yourself. It reveals the wounds you tried to hide behind masks of strength. But now, those masks are falling away. And as scary as it may seem, this is how healing begins. The soul cannot expand if you keep trying to be who others expect you to be. The soul only grows when you begin to remember who you truly are. This pause you're experiencing isn't the end of the road, it's the beginning of your truth. And it begins when you accept that you no longer need to force it. You no longer need to fit in. You no longer need to feign enthusiasm where there's pain. Because true awakening begins when you stop chasing what keeps you from yourself and begin to approach your own light, even if, for now, it seems distant. Spiritual transformation doesn't happen on good days. It happens on days when you feel broken, confused, exhausted. Because it's in these moments that you're most vulnerable, most open, most real. It's then that the soul can touch what was previously hidden. And little by little, you begin to realize that you no longer need to resist. You can let go. You can trust. You can surrender. You are not lost. You are being emptied of what is no longer necessary. You are being called to look within and listen to a new frequency that is trying to emerge. A frequency more aligned with who you truly are. A frequency that doesn't seek approval, that doesn't thrive on applause, that doesn't depend on results. A frequency that simply is, that pulsates, that feels, that transforms. And in this process, haste becomes the enemy, because the soul has its own time, a time that cannot be rushed, nor understood logically. It is a time that can only be felt. And when you allow yourself to feel, without judgment, without rushing, without pressure, you begin to realize that this transition you are experiencing is in fact a blessing in disguise, a rebirth hidden behind what seemed like just another difficult phase. So, breathe, look within, and trust. Because even if you don't see it yet, something inside you has already begun to change, something that can no longer be ignored, something that will lead you back to yourself. And if, upon hearing all this, you felt something stir within you, a memory, an emotion, a forgotten recollection, write in the comments, "I trust in the timing of my soul," because sometimes all we need to keep going is to know that we are not alone on this journey. What no one tells you, what almost no one realizes because they're too busy trying to appear strong, is that when motivation fades, when everything seems to be falling apart, that's precisely when something very deep is reorganizing itself within you. But since this isn't visible, since it can't be posted or explained logically, we call it weakness, a crisis, a bad phase. But it isn't. It's spiritual. It's silent. It's invisible, but it's real. The soul is shedding its skin, and every shedding hurts. Most people don't understand this because they've learned to associate self-worth with performance. You're good if you're performing. You're strong if you're responding. You're admirable if you're motivated. But the soul doesn't operate with this logic. The soul doesn't run. It waits. It listens. It feels. And sometimes it needs to stop to flourish. And blossoming, contrary to what they say, isn't always beautiful. Before the flower, there's darkness. There's the seed sinking into the earth. There's the breaking of the envelope, the bursting of the shell, the discomfort of the unknown. And all this happens silently, out of sight. That's where you are now. Not at the top, but at the root. Not on the stage, but in the cave. And it's precisely there that the key lies hidden. You haven't lost your meaning. You're being redirected. And this redirection doesn't come as a clear warning. It comes as a weariness you don't understand. An apathy that doesn't match who you were. An inner silence that at first seems frightening, but then begins to make sense. And meaning doesn't come from the mind. It comes from the soul. Maybe you're trying to force yourself to continue something that's already over. Maybe you're persisting in paths that no longer serve you. Maybe you're trying to rekindle a passion that was once legitimate, but has now faded. And that's okay. The soul also changes direction. What was nourishment yesterday may be poison today. What once drove you may now be dragging you down. And what once made sense may now be distancing you from who you truly are. But no one taught you to listen to this. No one told you that the soul also gets tired, that it also needs breaks, that it also has cycles. No one taught you that stagnation can be fertile, that emptiness can be the beginning, that the loss of meaning can be the soul saying, "This isn't it anymore." This is the hidden key, the understanding that lack of motivation is not a flaw but an invitation, a call to go within, a whisper that says, "Look at me." Because as long as you're searching outside for answers that can only be found within, you'll continue to feel empty even if everything seems right on the outside. The soul doesn't want you to continue on autopilot. It wants truth. It wants coherence. It wants what you experience on the outside to reflect who you are on the inside. And when that doesn't happen, it screams. But the soul's scream isn't loud. It manifests as exhaustion, as discouragement, as silent anguish. And if you don't listen, it stops. And when the soul stops, everything stops. Therefore, the key isn't to do more. It's to listen more, to feel more, to respect the time you need, to allow yourself to not know. Because the new meaning won't arrive while you're trying to recreate the old. The new requires space. And this space arises from silence, from pause, from surrender. Maybe you need to stop fighting this phase. Maybe you need to stop trying to escape where you are. And just start being with what you feel. Embrace the emptiness without trying to fill it by force. Embrace the silence without running toward the noise. Embrace the fatigue without blaming yourself for it. Because it is in this embrace that healing begins. The soul, when listened to, responds, but it responds in its own time. And that time may not be the time the world imposes on you. It may be slower, deeper, quieter, but it is true. And truth, even if it comes in drops, has the power to transform everything. Maybe what's missing in your life right now isn't action, nor courage, nor discipline. Maybe what's missing is permission. Permission to feel. Permission to stop. Permission to change course. Permission to say, "This doesn't serve me anymore." And believe me, This internal permission is worth more than any external plan, because only through it does the new path reveal itself. You're not stagnant. You're being reconfigured. You're being aligned with something greater, something that doesn't yet have form but is already pulsing within you. And all you need to do now is honor this process, even if you don't understand it, even if it hurts, even if it seems too slow. What you feel isn't weakness, it's transition. And transition, however confusing it may seem, always carries a hidden key. The key that unlocks the door to the next level of your consciousness. The key that returns you to yourself. The key that transforms what seemed like an end into a new beginning. If this moment made you breathe deeper, if it made you remember some part of yourself that was forgotten, comment below. I accept my break. Sometimes, a single sentence spoken with truth can open a new space within you. And who knows, perhaps also open a space in another soul who is listening to this now in silence. Maybe you're in that exact spot right now. One of those moments when waking up already feels like an immense effort, when the weight of the day hits you before you've even fully opened your eyes. It's not laziness, and deep down you know it. But how can you explain this tiredness to someone who's never felt it? How can you put into words this kind of exhaustion that comes not from the body, but from the soul? That feeling of carrying an invisible weight, of being present in the world, but absent from yourself, as if a part of you has gone silent, and you still don't know how to hear it again. Before, you had energy. Before, everything seemed to make sense. You dreamed, planned, believed. There was a flame within you that, even in the face of challenges, remained lit. But now that flame seems to have gone out, or perhaps it's simply hidden under a layer of fog, the kind that covers everything and obscures the path. Your mind tries to find explanations. Your heart searches for memories that will rekindle passion. But everything seems suspended, colorless, directionless. And in this place, where logic fails, where advice fails, transformation begins. Not in the way you expected, not with grand revelations or clear signs, but with small, subtle, and silent ruptures, a distancing from certain people, a discomfort in places that once welcomed you, a silence that begins to be more interesting than any superficial conversation. These are signs that something is moving within you, even if on the outside everything seems stagnant. Maybe you're there right now, sitting silently after another day of trying to be strong, trying to maintain your image, maintaining your character. Maybe you smiled, said everything was fine, did what was expected, but inside, a part of you screams, or rather, whispers. And that whisper tells you that you can't live the way you used to, that you can't continue following a script that's no longer yours, that you need to change, even without knowing where to go. And this not knowing is scary, because we've been taught to have answers, to have goals, to have control. But the soul doesn't work with certainties. It works with presence, with surrender, with listening. And it's when everything seems foggy, when the paths fade, that you're invited to trust. Not in something external, but in yourself, in what you feel, in what pulses, in what bothers you, in what no longer fits. The fog is sacred because it forces you to slow down. It prevents you from continuing to be distracted by what no longer resonates. And deep down it invites you to dive in. It is in this emptiness that your new essence is being stitched together, away from the noise, away from the expectations, away from the demands that always made you believe you needed to be more, do more, prove more. No, now it's different. Now it's about unlearning, about letting go of what was to allow what is to flourish. You are being stitched together from within, thread by thread, silence by silence, pain by pain. And this stitching is not visible, but it is deeply real. Think of all the times you tried to fit in, all the times you silenced your intuition to please, to keep the peace, to avoid disappointing. Think of how many parts of yourself you've left behind, believing this was maturity, when in reality, it was just fear of not being loved completely. Now, those parts are returning, and each one brings a truth you can no longer ignore. Maybe you're remembering who you were before you tried to be everything to everyone. Maybe you're realizing that this pause isn't about giving up, but about returning. A return to what's essential, to what pulses even when everything else falls apart, to what sustains you even when everything else falls silent. And in this return, You'll realize you were never without motivation. You were just trying to sustain what had already ended. And your body, your soul, your life screamed. They stopped. They called you back. Yes, this fog is uncomfortable, but it's also revealing. It's where you find questions you've never allowed yourself to ask. It's where you realize you're not here to be efficient. You're here to be whole. And wholeness isn't measured in productivity. Wholeness is felt in silence, in rest, in the truth that, even when it hurts, brings you back to yourself. Perhaps now is the time to look at this pause with new eyes, to stop resisting it and start embracing it. Because while you fight it, it remains. But when you embrace it, it begins to show you what it came to teach you. And almost always, the lesson isn't in the doing, but in the being. And if at this very moment something in you is recognizing itself in this process, if you felt that this fog is also yours, comment here. I'm learning to listen to myself. Sometimes that's all the soul needed to read to know it's not going through this alone. You are not the absence of will. And as much as the silence within you has long been interpreted as emptiness, failure, or an end, perhaps now you are beginning to realize that it is, in fact, a womb, a fertile space where something new is being gestated, even if still formless, even if still nameless. It is not the end of your motivation. It is the beginning of your truth. Because motivation born from the soul doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't force you. It whispers. It invites. It guides gently, not heavily. This is where consciousness begins to shift. This is where you begin to understand that you no longer need to force yourself to be someone you're not, or to do what doesn't resonate with you, because this need to prove yourself, to justify yourself, to reach standards that were never yours, all of this begins to crumble when the soul awakens. And even if this awakening doesn't come with fireworks, it comes with something even more powerful. The feeling of finally returning home. Rumi said, "Don't settle for stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend." And perhaps that's the call you're hearing now. A subtle yet profound call. An invitation to stop measuring yourself by the lives of others, by the paths that worked for others, by the ready-made formulas the world has forced upon you. Because your journey is unique. And as long as you keep trying to fit into molds that don't respect your essence, you'll continue to feel out of place, tired, and fragmented. Motivation will return, yes, but not in the form you once knew, not as that blind rush, that euphoria that made you run without knowing where to go. It will return as presence, as alignment, as coherence between what you feel and what you experience. And that changes everything, because you stop chasing what isn't yours and start walking toward what truly sustains you. Your motivation now will no longer come from obligation. It will come from the soul. This doesn't mean the days will stop being challenging, but it does mean you'll start acting from a different place. A place where you don't need to emotionally abuse yourself to cope, where you no longer need to perform an enthusiasm you don't feel, where you have the right to be whole, even when you're in process. Because this is true spiritual empowerment, the freedom to be who you are without guilt. The courage to respect your own time, without having to explain it to anyone. You begin to realize that every pause was essential, that every tiredness was, in fact, a warning, that the body didn't fail you, he said, that the soul didn't abandon you, it simply brought you closer to itself. And this reunion, even if it happens in the most uncomfortable silence, is the seed of a new existence, a lighter existence, truer, more yours. And at that point, the game changes. You're no longer trying to fit into the world. You're creating a world where your soul can dwell. You're transforming every wound into wisdom, every silence into learning, every fall into foundation, because you've understood that power isn't in appearing strong, it's in being whole. And being whole requires vulnerability. It requires presence. It requires listening. You start to hear your intuition more clearly. You start to move away from places that drain your energy. You start to reach out to people who don't require effort to be who you are. And all of this happens naturally, without formulas, without forcing. Because when the soul takes over, life reorganizes itself, not because it gets easier, but because it finally makes sense. And this new meaning isn't found outside. It's born within. It's revealed in the silence you've learned to honor, It's cultivated in the pauses you've allowed yourself. It's strengthened in the choices you've begun to make based on what you feel, and not what's expected of you. You realize you can live in peace with your own truth. And this peace, however subtle it may seem, is one of the greatest powers one can achieve. A shift in consciousness doesn't come from a ready-made answer. It's born of a process, of a journey, of a series of small awakenings that, little by little, dismantle everything you thought you needed to be. And in this dismantling, you rebuild yourself, but not as before, not to please, not to belong, but to live in integrity with your soul. You are not discouragement. You are the one who is going through this moment with courage. You are not apathy. You are the space where life is finding a new way to express itself. You are not emptiness. You are the womb where the new is being gestated, and this newness doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be honored. If this change is happening inside you, even if slowly, even if you don't have all the words yet, comment below. My motivation now is to live truthfully. Write this as an internal declaration, because sometimes the simple act of naming what we're feeling is the first step toward freeing ourselves. And who knows, maybe these words, which now make sense to you, could also be the beginning of the awakening of another soul listening in silence. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized this truth, perhaps silently, perhaps with tears in your eyes, perhaps with a lighter heart. And if this video has kept you going this far, it's because your soul chose not just to listen, but to feel. This journey doesn't end now. In fact, it's just beginning. So I invite you to follow along. Subscribe to the channel to continue immersing yourself in these moments of healing, listening, and rebirth. This space exists to remind you whenever necessary that you are not alone nor lost. And if all this touched you, if at any point you felt seen from the inside, leave a like, not out of habit, but as a gesture of gratitude for this meeting between souls. And now, let me take you even deeper. The next video is already on screen. It's a continuation of what began here. Click and follow along with me, because your soul is being reborn.